Someone was detected at your island front door. Someone was at your head.
Hello.
Hello.
Ugh.
What happened to that wall, Harold?
Happened to what?
That wall behind you.
Oh, I'm at Yitzi's house. It's
Oh,
a wallpaper.
oh, it's well.
Yeah.
I
It looks
think,
like some kid
yeah,
started scratching with it with a
yeah.
crayon. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
The California governor debate's on right now.
How bad is it?
I mean, if I had to sum up the majority of what they're saying, everything is about you don't want to vote for a Republican because it's all about Trump, and Trump is bad, and everything
Yeah.
bad in California is because of Trump, and we have to fight Trump, and all the awful things and the prices, gas prices is because of the Iran war, cost of living is because of Trump,
Yeah.
Trump, Trump, Trump. It's
But
all
Trump's
Trump's fault.
not running.
What?
Yeah. Oh, what's his name? The British guy, is he there? Hilton?
Yeah, Hilton is there. Oh yeah,
Steve
and
Hilton?
ICE is hard. ICE. We have to fight ICE because they're doing racial profiling. Racial
Yes.
profiling is illegal in California. We have to
Uh,
prosecute ICE, and we have to defend the people of California. Oh, it's just insane. This
yeah,
is
I
silly
know.
talk.
Yeah, yeah. And the mayor race is going to be even worse. What happened?
It's insane.
They have brought
Insane.
up Israel yet? That it's Israel's fault that the gas prices are high?
Everything, yes, everything is Trump's fault. Nobody has solutions like, hey, we need to find ways to, improve our economy, make it, bring back jobs to California. No one says anything. It's all about fighting Trump. That's all it is. Everything is fighting
How
Trump.
about how about all the jobs lost in the movie industry? Everyone went to either Georgia or British Columbia.
No, 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 no. It's all about Trump. And the thing is, the reason is because
Oh,
they poll voters, and the most common denominator in the world.
hi, Ernie.
We're on page 215. We're going to start Muktzeh.
Oh, good.
On, Mark. Okay. So this is what Magda's mother,
Magda's father, David
Magda's
ben Aryeh Halevi.
David ben Aryeh Halevi. I
Yeah,
remember Mr. Muller very well.
Yes.
sure,
Yeah.
sure,
Rabbi Halberstam's shul.
exactly.
Okay, in the previous two volumes and in the first four shiurim of this volume, we have studied many of the 39 melachos that are biblically prohibited on Shabbos. In the next few shiurim, we will discuss wide-ranging rabbinic prohibitions not directly related to these malachos. The prohibitions against moving items defined as muktzeh on Shabbos. And we will start by discussing the reasons for these prohibitions and when exactly the rabbinic prohibitions were enacted. Abe, we're on page 215. We're doing muktzeh.
Thank you.
According to many passages in Tanakh and the words of Chazal, as well as subsequent writings throughout the generations, individual mitzvot and halachic obligations must be viewed as more than simply physical activities devoid of meaning. Performing sacred actions to life's values and attitudes. And the mitzvah is meant to be the expression of a more basic spiritual quality. The Michtav Melial and the Sefer HaChinuch emphasize that performing the mitzvah leads to achieving proper feelings and attitudes. According to this, one's religious life must be made of more than merely blankly checking the boxes of a list of tasks. In this vein, the Navi Yeshayahu declares that the ideal Shabbos involves a kind of spiritual enjoyment, which comes from completely disconnecting from one's regular and routine pursuits in favor of truly appreciating Hashem's sacred day. In the Pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Nun Ches, Im tashiv mishabat raglecha, if you hold back your foot on Shabbos, asos chafetzecha b'yom kadshi, and refrain from doing your own personal activities on my holy day, v'karata l'Shabbos onek, and you will call the Shabbos your pleasure, Ligdosh Hashem mechubad, for the holy Hashem who is honored, v'kibadato me'asos drachecha, and you honor Hashem by not going in your own way, and from mimtzo chavtzecha v'daver daver. Mimtzo chavtzecha refers to like dealing with your business, v'diber daver, and speaking words that are also related to your business. Az tisanegal Hashem, if you can withdraw from those types of activities on Shabbos, you will delight in Hashem. V'hir kavticha b'mosei oretz, you will be elevated to the high places. V'achalticha nachlas Yaakov, you will get the heritage of Jacob Avicha, your father. Ki fi Hashem diber. In light of Yeshayahu's call to interrupt one's regular behaviors on Shabbos, the Gemara Masechta Shabbos extrapolates from his words that certain concrete behaviors should be distinct on Shabbos above and beyond the specific actions related to Malacha. The Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yud Gimel darshans that pasuk, v'chibadato ma'asos drachacha, v'chibadato, how do you honor Hashem? How do you honor the Shabbos? What you wear on Shabbos should not be what you wear during the week. Rav Yochanan used to call his clothing that which honors him. A person sort of shows his honor by what he wears. Then the pasuk in Yeshaya says, "Ma'asos drachacha, shelo yehi lukach shel Shabbos ki lukach shel chal." Even the way you walk on Shabbos should be different than the way you walk during the week. Mimtzo chafatzecha means chafatzecha asurit. Your private business dealings, your weekdays affairs, should be prohibited on Shabbos. Chavtzei shamayim mutorim, but things that are related to Shemayim, mitzvos, Torah, right? Daber daver. Even your speech on Shabbos should be different than the way it is during the week. Thus, the Gemara identifies certain behaviors which help to shape the general mood of the Shabbos day on the base of that pasuk in Yeshaya. The halacha also states that it's forbidden to move certain items on Shabbos because these items are set aside, muktzeh, for use that is incompatible with Shabbos. If something is huktzah l'davar acher, let's say something is set aside for a specific use, that's the word muktzah. By prohibiting moving these things, the halacha further distances a person from the weekly pursuits, which should be escaped and dismissed on the holy day of Shabbos. As we will see below, some of the explanations given for the restrictions of muktzah are connected to these ideas and to this pasuk in Yeshayahu. So the reasons for the prohibitions against moving muktzah. The Rambam prefaces his codification of the halachos of muktzah by providing three reasons. The rabbis prohibited us from moving certain objects that we normally do on weekday. The Rambam asks, what was the reason for the prohibition? Amru. So they answered, the prophets warned, and said that the way you walk on Shabbos should not be the way you walk during the week. What you talk about on Shabbos should not be what you talk about during the week. The things that you are occupied with in terms of touching and moving them should not be on Shabbos the same way you do on weekday. If you were allowed to move everything that you normally move, the Shabbos would appear to you like a regular weekday. And you would lift the kelim and fix them, or move them mipina lepino, mibayis labayis. You'd move them from one corner to another, from one house to another. Olat sni avonim, or you would hide things. On Shabbos, people are not working, so you're going to try to occupy yourself. V'nimtza shalosh Shabbos ubitel atam. V'nimtza shalosh Shabbos. If he moved muktzah, he didn't rest completely. Ubatel atam shnever b'torah lemanya nu. The Torah says you shall rest, and this is going to interfere with your rest. That's number one, the Rambam says. V'o, k'shivaker v'tatal kelim, when you look for kelim and move them, shamlachtan le'isser, and kelim, let's say a power saw, right? You're not allowed to use an electric power saw on Shabbos, because you're not allowed to cut trees on Shabbos. So it's a kli whose malacha is le'isser. And therefore, if you're going to move kelim where it's involved in a forbidden activity, by moving a kli that is used with prohibited work, you're going to come to do the prohibited work. V'o, third words, the nation make this enam balei umnias. Most Jews were not craftsmen. Ela b'telin kol yamein. They don't work. Kagon atayolin, tourists, yoshvei kronois, people who sat in the coffee shops. Shekol yameinim shoytzrim emloch. There are a lot of, they don't work at all. And if on Shabbos you could move things like the rest of the day, so anyways, for such a person, showing that you're resting on Shabbos is going to harden the first is going to be harder in the first place because this guy doesn't do very much during the week. So it doesn't look like the Monday is different from Shabbos. It's going to be even worse if he touches or moves prohibited kelim. So this is refraining from these activities applies to everybody. So the Rambam says that's why he believes the Chachamim created the prohibition of muktzeh. And the only things that you can touch and move on Shabbos are things that you are permitted to use on Shabbos. You're allowed to eat and drink on Shabbos. So you're allowed to move cups and spoons. The Ravid gives another reason for this prohibition, based on the passage in the Gemara which connects the prohibition of muktzah to the biblical prohibition against carrying. He explains that limiting the permissibility of moving objects limits the risk of a person inadvertently carrying in the public domain on Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to walk Daled Amis B'Reshus HaRabbi. You're also not allowed to carry from the Reshus HaYachid to the Reshus HaRabbi. The Ravid says that by minimizing things that we lift and touch and move, we're going to stay away from the prohibition of carrying, right? That means before you start carrying something from inside the house to outside the house, you got to pick it up. So therefore, by refraining from picking it up, has you avoiding carrying. It's a gzeira to keep us away from carrying. To summarize, 4 different reasons are offered to explain the prohibition of muktzeh. 1, so that one will not regard Shabbos as an ordinary weekday. 2, to prevent getting involved with something usually used for a prohibited melacha, and thus being drawn to perform the melacha. 3, only sensation of moving muktzah is a noticeable change on Shabbos for some idle individuals. And 4, like the Ravid, to prevent the person from inadvertently carrying in the public domain on Shabbos. Now, how do we categorize? There are different categories of muktzah. Those of us in the Daf Yomi are familiar with some of this. Although we often use the term muktzah to refer to all items that may not be moved on Shabbos, in truth, there are a number of different types of muktzah, not all of which have the same guidelines. The Gemara discusses different categories of muktzah in different places. The Beit Yosef, right? Rav Yosef Karo, in his commentary on the Torah, provides a summary listing 6 different categories of muktzah. Says the Beit Yosef Oren Chaim in Siman Shin Chet, which is the Siman of muktzah. It's a very long Siman. Inei klal advarim hamuktzim she'asurim l'tata mischakim l'shisha chalot. The Beis Yosef says the muktzahs are divided into 6 categories. Harishon, kli shu muktzah machmas chisron kis. You have a very expensive kli. Dainu kli shodem makbid alav shlo yivka. You have a kli that's very expensive. You could lose money if it got damaged. And any kli that you're worried that could get damaged, like what? Sakin shel shchita. If you're a shoichet and you have a shchita knife, so the shchita knife had to be preserved very carefully, because if it had nicks on it, it would trafe up the shchita. Or shel mila, right? A mila knife, or v'shel svarim, saparim, or barber's scissors. You were a barber and you used it for your living. So that's called machmas chisron kis. Hasheni, Kli shemlachtu le'isser. If a kli's main purpose is for some prohibited work, like I said, a power saw, that you can't do that on Shabbos, so that's a classic kli shemlachtu le'isser. And there are many other examples of that. Hashlishi kol davar she'eino kli, v'lo maichel adam, v'lo maichel behema. Let's say you have like a stone on the ground, right? A stone is not a kli, and it's not food, either for people or animals. And list could go avonim, stones, mo'os, money is not a kli, and it's not food. Kinim, reeds, eitzim, pieces of wood, koros, wooden beams, afar, sand, v'chol, umeis, a dead body, ubale chayim, right, animals, which I've already learned that an animal has no specific use on Shabbos, so it would be muktzah. It's not a kli, it's not food, either for an adam or a behema. Ugroi grois. Let's say you're trying to dry figs, so you bring the figs up on the roof so that they would bake in the sun, or you're making raisins, tzimukim. So you've pushed them aside from use this Shabbos by bringing them up to this roof to have them dry up. Well, it's clear you're not using them this Shabbos. So you've designated them not for use. Okay? Where you place them for drying. Anything that's not necessarily usable. That's considered muktzah machmas, its own. Here they define it its own nature, but I would say it's muktzah by its own nature. Haravi, kli shemlachtu leheter. It's a kli that's used for a permissible activity. Umunach alav echad me'advarim hamuktzeh machmas kufa. But one of these other things that we mentioned that is muktzah machmas gufo is resting on top of it. If you go to Chavis, you have a barrel of wine, so that's usable on Shabbos. You can drink wine on Shabbos. You can dip in to the barrel or open up the spigot of the barrel to get beer or wine. However, yesh alav evet, there is a stone on it. Or kar sheyesh alav mos. You have a pillow and there's money on the pillow. Vafilu husru achar. Now, even if these items were eventually removed, kiven shahayu aleim ben hashmoshes, if the money was on the pillow, or the stone was on the barrel, ben hashmoshes, right? The period of time on Friday between Shkias Achama and Tzeisak Achavim, that's known as Ben Hashmoshes, where it's Safek Yom, Safek Laim, and we treat it as Shabbos. It's at that point that you have to designate usages for Shabbos. So if at Ben Hashmoshes you have removed the pillow from normal usage because you put a stone on it, there's a concept, migud iskatsul ben hashmoshes, it's katsul kulio. Because you designated it for the use in ben hashmoshes, it becomes muktzah for the whole day. It's an important one of the categories. Chamishi davar shaya ben hashmoshes mechuber, if it was attached to the ground ben hashmoshes, or mechusar tzeda, it had not been hunted ben hashmoshes. So if something was trapped ben hashmoshes, or was cut from the ground, bein hashmoshes, so those items would be able to be moved on Shabbos. But if they're still mechuber or not trapped, bein hashmoshes, well, that's the last time you have where it's still really not Shabbos fully, and then therefore it's going to be muktzah. Hashishi, muktzah machlos mitzvah kagan atze sukkah v'noya. So there's something called it's muktzah because of a mitzvah. Your noy sukkah, the decorations of the sukkah, are muktzah, all sukkahs. And therefore, on Shabbos there's certainly muktzah, and even the walls of the sukkah will be muktzah on Shabbos. In this year, we will discuss mainly the halachos of the second category, which is kli shemlachtu le'isser, kelim that are muktzah because the activity done with that kli is a prohibited activity. The others will be discussed in the other two shurim. Historically, when were the decrees against moving muktzah enacted? You notice that the prohibition is moving it. It's not touching it. We're going to see, you can touch muktzah items. It's not, I think growing up, we were under the impression that it's a touch thing. It's not a touch thing, it's a moving thing. You can't move the item. At first glance, it would seem that the laws of muktzah were enacted by Chazal, because the Torah never alludes to them anymore. But the Gemara Masechta Shabbos relates that when David HaMelech died on Shabbos, moving his body was only permitted in an indirect manner due to the laws of muktzah. So muktzah was already noyeg in the times of David HaMelech. Shalach Shlomo lebei midrash. Shlomo HaMelech was 12 years old. His father died. And he sent word to the yeshiva, Abba Meis. David HaMelech died. There's a whole medrash we learned. He was learning. So the Sultan had to I think a tree collapsed and David suddenly stopped learning, and that's when the Sultan got him. He was outside.
Wasn't the dogs barking?
Maybe the dogs bark.
Dogs are barking. What to see what they were barking at.
Yeah, either barking, and then or there was some sound that he heard. Right. Umutal b'cham. Well, here's where the dogs come in. Uklavim shalbeis abba re'evim. So he's outside in the courtyard, and the dogs are barking, and they're hungry. It's not covered. He's got the goof is going to be attacked by the dogs. Ma'es shalchulei. Chatoch nevele v'hanech l'fnei klal. If you have a dead animal carcass, cut it up and throw it to the dogs. They'll eat that. Put a loaf of bread on the goof or a baby, and you have to move the baby in the house. You have to move the bread in the house. So machmas, the baby or the bread, you could move the mace. Otherwise, mace is one of these items which we said, which is a muktzah machmas gufo. It's not a kli, and it's not a Michael Ladim, it's not a Michael Baim. So the Gemara clearly indicates that the prohibition against moving miktzah, at least for certain items, existed as early as the time of David HaMelech. And it's not a decree initially by Chazal, that's much later. Elsewhere, the Gemara relates that much later at the time of Nehemiah, which God willing we're going to learn soon, extra restrictions were imposed regarding moving utensils on Shabbos. Many of those restrictions were subsequently lifted. Tan Rabba, B'Rishon hayu oimrim shloisha kelim niton b'Shabbos. They would say that the following 3 kelim could be moved on Shabbos. Mikzoya shel dveila, which was, they used to make a cake of dried figs. And there was a special knife that was used to cut that. That's called a mikzoya. Zuama listrin shel kedera. So this was a sort of a spoon and fork that was used to scrape the bottom of a pot. V'sakin ktana shel gabi shulchan. Small knife that was on the table. So these were things that were permitted to be moved on Shabbos. Hitiru. V'chazr v'hitiru. The rabbis over the generations saw that the Jewish people were keeping Shabbos well, so they permitted many, many more kelim. Ad sha'amru, kol kelim niton b'Shabbos. They said you could move any kli, chutz min meser agadol. This was a saw, the yatet shel machresha, and the blade of a plow, because those are clearly kelim that are used for prohibited actions, cutting down a tree, plowing a field. Those harisha, there's katsira, right? But they were very liberal regarding other kelim. This Mishnah was taught in the day of Nehemiah. And in the times of Nehemiah, because as we've been learning in Ezra, the people who came back weren't all from, some of them had married non-Jewish wives, and people were lax. So many chumras came into play. D'chsiv b'yamim ha'hema, ra'isa b'yoda drachim gitot b'Shabbos maviyim haremos. There's a pasuk in Nehemiah that says he saw people pressing wine on Shabbos, schlepping grain in on Shabbos with donkeys. And to increase the level of Shmir on Shabbos, Nehemiah instituted many chumras so that they would learn how to observe Shabbos. So it would appear that at the time of David HaMelech, only objects that were neither utensils nor food were muktzeh. Food was not muktzeh, and utensils were not muktzeh. But the prohibitions against moving different categories were instituted later by the Nehemiah. And some of them were removed, but remnants of those prohibitions remain today. The Shulchan Aruch HaRav, written by the Baal HaTanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, confirms that moving objects that have no use was prohibited no later than the time of David HaMelech. Davar she'eino roy b'Shabbos, something that a kli wouldn't be used on Shabbos because the malachas us. Haya asur l'tatal after mei David u'Shlomo. It was prohibited even the time of King David and King Solomon, and perhaps even before. The Aruch HaShulchan, right? Aruch HaShulchan died 1910. He's sort of the competitor to the Mishnah Berurah that many people use for halacha. The Aruch HaShulchan makes the surprising claim that the initial prohibition against moving muktzeh dates from the giving of the Torah, as refraining from moving objects in the way one does during the week is part of the obligation to rest on Shabbos. He also writes that this initial prohibition was identical to the prohibition in force today, and all of the later extensions instituted by Nehemiah were rescinded. Shvusei Shabbos, rabbinic prohibitions, ain't domes l'chol isuid rabbanon. They're not all similar. Vehein kimiduraisa. Special Shabbos rabbinic prohibitions are, he says, really not isuid rabbanon. They're actually miduraisa. Davaz Rabbi Lanu Aramba. Bereish Per Chafal Shekosov Nemer B'Torah Tishbos. In the Torah it says you shall rest. Afilu Dvorim Sheina Malocha. Even things that are not necessarily work, Chayiv Lishbos Mehem. You have to cease and desist. Udvorim Harbein Sha'asr Chachamim Mishum Shvus. The rabbinic prohibition of Shvus. Shvus specifically refers to rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbos. Chachamim made a lot of these takot. Lefi zeh gam Yisrei Mukzeh, how you may ashen the Torah. Says the Aruch HaShulchan that the prohibitions of Mukzeh existed at the time of Har Sinai. Vayadina maz ke'achar shechazru v'hitir v'chazru v'hitir. It was the same then as it was when, as we learned in the Gemara there, that they eventually permitted everything. In the time of Nehemiah, the people were very lax in Shabbos observance, because of what happened in Babylonia. They made exer in their generation. The law hitir rak shlosha kelim. They only permitted the knife, right, and that scraping fork, right. The law exeres kfus l'doros, but their exeris did not remain permanent. So, according to Aruch HaShulchan, although the specific laws of Mukzeh are not mentioned or written in the Torah, they are fulfillment of the biblical mitzvah to cease activity on Shabbos. The Gemara in Pesachim 47b proposes that using Mukzeh firewood on Yom Tov is a malacha, derived from the biblical command to prepare one's needs before Shabbos, which also applies to Yom Tov by extension. However, this proposition is eventually rejected by the Gemara, although Rashi in Beitza quotes the proposition as the final position of Rabbah. The Chassam Sofer clarifies that this can only be with respect to the prohibition of eating Mukzeh food on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Moving Mukzeh is certainly only rabbinically prohibited. So let's go into a little bit more kli shemlachta le'isr. Like we said, the power saw. A kli that is made specifically for a prohibited activity. We saw above in source 5 that a restriction on moving utensils on Shabbos was imposed in the time of Nehemiah. But that restriction was subsequently lifted with respect to most kelim. The Gemara quotes a dispute regarding which categories of utensils are permitted to move. So the Gemara notes that it said yitiru v'chazar v'yitiru. So the Gemara wants to know my yitir v'chazar v'yitiru. What kelim came into for permission? Amar Abaye, yitiru davar shemalachtu leheter l'tzorach kufa. A kli whose function is for permitted use, and you're going to use it to perform a permitted activity. And then chazar v'yitir davar shemlach v'leheter l'tzorach makomo. Then they said, a kli that is used for a permitted function can be moved because you need its place. Let's say it was sitting on a dining room table. You have to eat lunch there. It could be moved. Now, then they went ahead, and even a kli, whose function is really for a prohibited malacha, if you're going to use that kli to do a permitted thing, you need to use the back of the saw to, move something. that you otherwise couldn't touch because it was hot or something. So you're going to do a permitted activity with the kli that is normally manufactured for an Isser Dika Malacha. So for use in, but the tzarch makomo lo. If you had a kli that is used for a prohibited malacha, and you need the place where that kli is sitting, you're not allowed to move it for the place. Vadain biyado achas.
And what if you need the kli itself? Like, for example, a
If you
hammer.
need the kli for a permitted malacha, the Abai said you could do it. Hitiru davar shemalachto leisr letzarach gufo. Tzarach gufo means you're doing a permitted malacha.
So that's why if you have a hammer and you can use the hammer to break open shells,
Yes.
like nuts.
Yes.
You can use you can pick up the hammer.
Yes. Yes. Even though you would, first of all, yeah, we'd have to debate whether a hammer is a kli shemalachto leisr. Probably is. And by using it for a permitted is, but let's say the hammer was on your table and you want to use your table based on a baya here. It's not final psak. Based on a baya, you wouldn't be able to move it. Now, v'adayin biyado achas in. If the kli, which is a kli from Malachta L'Isser, was in your hand already, then you could move it. But if you have a kli that is so large that you need two hands, then you couldn't move it from a kol. Eventually, they mattered everything, including kelim that you could move with two hands. Once they said Yitiru, says Rava, what do we make? Why should it be a difference whether we need that kli to do a permitted act or whether we need its place? Permit is permit. So Rava wants to learn it more expansively. So the permit for a kli whose function is for a permitted thing, that you could move bein l'tzarach gufo, bein l'tzarach makom. That you could move whether you're going to use it to do something with it or you need its place. Then they said you could move it from the sun to the shade. So Rava was more expansive in his leniency. He said you could take a kli, like a hammer, was mlachtos le'isr, both to do a permitted thing and you also, if you need its place. However, mechama l'tseil lo, but to move the hammer from the sun into the shade, you could not do that. However, adayim ba'odem echad in. But with if one person could move it, all of these heterim to move it was existing. But if it's a kli that needed shnei bnei adam lo, the eventual heter was even kalim that are big enough that two people need to move. Thus, according to Abaya, today, one may only move a utensil whose function is for a prohibited use in order to use the utensil for a permitted use. A utensil whose function for a permitted use may be moved out of the way if one needs to use the space in it. According to Rava, one may move a kli shemlach l'isser either in order to use the utensil, l'tzarach gufo, or if one needs to use the space it occupies, but not merely in order to protect the utensil from damage, like moving it out of the sun. But that's a kli shemlach l'isser, which has a geder. A kli shemlach l'heter may be moved even to protect. The Rishonim agree that the halacha follows Rava, right? Abaya, we only paskin like Abaya in 6 places in Shas. The mnemonic is Ya'al Kagam, Yeir Shalom Midas, whatever. There's a Yud, Ayin, Lamed. There's 6 halachas and shas that we paskin like Abaya. But there are, I believe, 357 Havayas de Abaya V'Rava throughout Shas. I know that because there's a book that's called the 357 Havayas de Abaya V'Rava. And so there's a 357 machlokes throughout Shas, and we paskin like Rava in 351 of them. Let's see how we paskin. Shulchan Aruch. Again, Siman Shif Shin Chet. Kli Shemlachto Le'Isser, a hammer or a power saw. Mutar L'Tatalo. It can be moved. Bein L'Tzarach Gufo, like a goldsmith or blacksmith hammer, like Chaim said, in order to use it to crack nuts. Kornish shel zahavim, that's a goldsmith, or nefachim, a blacksmith. Livtzavo gozim, you're using the hammer to crack a walnut. Kurdam lachtoch bo devela. And the axe, right, what is normally used to chop down a tree, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, so it's definitely a kli shelachto le'isser, but you're using it to cut open a fig cake. Bein letzarach makomo, and you can move it even, you need its place. Ava mechama l'tzeil, but to move it from the sun to the shade, you're afraid it's going to get damaged or break or get stolen, then it's usher. That's clearly the sheet of Rava. Hang on, Susie, I need help because 1 second.
Here.
But let's first plug it in. I'm going to lose power. 1 second. Here, Susie, just plug this in. Go ahead. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, take it. Oh. Susie, can you get that from him? I don't have it work. Here. Good. Put that on. That's cool. Okay. Have power. Let's define a little bit more carefully what we mean by kli shemlachto le'isser. Now that we have some understanding about when vessels may or may not be moved, we must define the category of kli shemlachto le'isser, which types of vessels may be moved. The Mishnah Berurah writes that a kli shemlachto le'isser is defined as a vessel which is used mostly for tasks that are prohibited on Shabbos, even if it also has permitted uses. Poskim also discussed the status of a kli that would never be used for any permitted activity. The Prima Godim, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and the Aruch HaShulchan all imply that only a vessel that might potentially be used for permitted activity has the status of a kli shemlachto le'isser. But if one would never use it for a permitted purpose, it has the status of muktzeh machmas gufa, like a stone or like a quartz, which is a more stringent type of muktzah. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach takes this opinion as well. But the Mishnah Berurah writes, for example, with regard to a wick, that such an item still has the status of a kli shemlachto le'isser, and Rav Moshe Feinstein holds similarly. This question might be relevant to moving a grill, for example, which would never be used for anything other than its intended purpose, which is grilling meat, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shemlachta le'isr kloimar, shemiyuchedet ledavar she'asur lasos b'Shabbos. We're talking about a kli that is designated specifically for a prohibited melacha. Afilu imrak rov melachta le'isr. Even it only 60% of the time this kli is used for prohibited things. It would still get this leniency of kli shemlachta le'isr, because remember, it's a leniency. Because Mukzeh machmas gufo, we're going to see, has more stringent rules. There are less times that you can move it. We'll see when you can move it. But for example, the mace could be moved only if you put something that is movable on top of it. Hugam ken b'chlal zeh. The bir halacha there, which we know, of course, is the Mishnah Berurah himself, cites the Prima Godim as the source for this ruling, but adds that in his own view, this should be limited to utensils whose clear primary purpose is for an activity prohibited on Shabbos. A utensil that also has a main use that is permitted on Shabbos is not a kli shemlachta le'isr, even if it is used more often for a prohibited activity. That would be considered a kli shemlachta leheter. Says the Bir Halacha, kardom lachtoch, an axe, v'dad because of a prima godim v'taktu b'mishnah berurah, that we repeated it here, the kli sharov lachta le'isr, a kli where the majority of its uses for prohibited things, who gam ken b'chlal kli shemlachta le'isr, is in this category. Ulanir daiti hayanir dezedavka imikara hu rak l'mlachta le'isr, but its primary function is that v'rak lepamim. Just sometimes mishtamish b'leravalim derech hakli. Let's say it's 50-50, right? Lishtamish b'lishneya v'rak sheli'iser mishtamshin b'yoiser. Maybe a little bit more. It's used for prohibited things. Minolan the matzadaita minei. Where do you see that you've diverted your mind from using it? Dalo asuyel melacha heter gamkein. It's used for permissible items. So why should you take it out of the category of a kli shemlachta leheter? The Bir Halacha cites the Prima Godim regarding utensil primarily used for an activity that's rabbinically prohibited. Such a utensil is considered a kli shemlachta le'isr. So that's a important geder. Kli shemlachta le'isr afilu yisrael rak rabbanan. However, a utensil that is used for an activity that's permitted, but not generally performed on Shabbos, due to a non-mandatory stringency, like a certain chumrah, we don't generally do it, but it's really permitted, then the kli is not defined as a kli shemlachta le'isr, and you can move it. Remember, we saw that a kli shemlachta leheter you could move for its place, you could move for its use, you could move it out of the sun, so that can be moved. And the Orchos Shabbos, who's a contemporary posek in Shabbos, kli shemlachta ein asur min adin. If a kli is just prohibited because of a chumrah, yeshma poskim shekosav she'ena begeder kli shemlachta le'isr. It's not a kli shemlachta le'isr. Umutar l'tatlo b'Shabbos, you can move it. Af shemachmas hachumra mishtam, even though because of the chumrah we don't use it. The Hilchos Shabbos writes that a closed umbrella is considered a kli shemlachta le'isr, even though some poskim hold that not using it on Shabbos is only a stringency and not strictly forbidden. It'll be discussed in a future shir because bona, opening umbrella, is considered a bona. Hilchos of Mukzeh all cite the Hilchos Shabbos. Similarly, it's a custom not to ride a bicycle on Shabbos for multiple reasons. Yet the Orchos Shabbos says it would seem to have a status of a kli shemlachta le'isr, since the custom not to use it would seem to have been extended by people to not moving it either. Let's just finish this last piece. Rav Yitzchak Yosef lists a number of common examples of Kalim Shemlachtu Le'Isser. Elohen mixes form Shanachshavim Kimuktzeh Machbos Mlach Nisser. Kirayim Shel Gaz, a gas stove. Mavreshes Tzvia, a paintbrush. Machvas Rekanit, an empty pan. Mechaded, a sharpener. A machak, an eraser. Matria, a umbrella. Menorat chashmal o neft, an electric or gas light. Masmer, a nail. A misparayim, scissors. Meshor, a saw. Niyar zchuchit, sandpaper. Niyar copy, a carbon copy. Neshek, ammunition or weapon. Sichot, pins. Sargel, a ruler. 8, a pen. Patish, a hammer. Tzvat, pliers. A ka'arash yecheroto ladlik baner shemen. Right? A container that holds oil for, olive oil for a candle. Avshli likupos, a ner, Shabbos, even if the candle has been lit. A shofar. Shpud. A shpud is like when you make a shish kebab, like a skewer. Taner afia, an oven. Imen regilim lachsan bo divrei Michael. If you normally don't put food in it. Tefillin. V'chayotze behen. Although there's no obligation to wear tefillin on Shabbos, the Gemara in several places indicates that there is no prohibition against wearing or moving tefillin. Based on Kabbalistic sources, the Shulchan Aruch prohibits wearing tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov. But regarding Mukzeh, he writes in the Beis Yosef that tefillin may be moved as necessary. This is also the ruling of the Ramah, although others rule more stringently. Remember, Kalim Shemlachtam Le'Isser, we have reasons why we can move them. If you need the place, or if you need, we said to move them out of the sun. So these things could be moved. There are certain situations that can be moved, otherwise you would not move them. Many more practical examples and other types of books that can be found in the following English works. Rav Yisrael Pinchas Badner, the Halachos of Mukzeh. Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen, Mukzeh Practical Guide. Rav Yonason Ben Sur, the Mukzeh Directory. Okay. So we will stop here.
Ernie, just
Yeah.
2 questions. If you have your tefillin in your talis zekel, and you need to take it out because you're going to shul, forgot to take it out before shul, would you be allowed to move it?
You need its play. You need the makom,
Right.
right? And you're trying to minimize carrying, right? Because even with an A-roof, whatever, and I would think it's maks because you need its makom. You
Yeah.
need its place.
And one other thing, Chaim mentioned that the dogs were barking. That's not what the Midrash says. The Midrash says that the leaves outside the tree,
The trees were shaking.
were shaking, and he walked down and he stopped learning for a second, and then he died. But that's a raya also that David HaMelech had dogs. The dogs were around. That's a raya that David HaMelech had dogs.
Nice.
But
So
that's
what was the
Well,
story
well, well.
of the dogs barking? Because I thought the dogs barking because
no. The Midrash.
No, the dogs were hungry, and Shlomo Melech was worried that it was going to violate the body. The dogs were going to attack. Were going to eat the body.
Right. But that's different. But Shlomo Melech obviously had dogs in his chatzer.
But remember, Walter, David HaMelech is the king. Maybe
Right.
they had guard dogs.
I'm not sure. Okay, however you want to learn it out. But David HaMelech basically, because when he heard it, the leaf of all the trees shaking like they did, that's what the Malach HaMavet did. He shook the trees. That's what the Midrash says. Nothing to do with dogs barking.
Okay, that's how I remembered it, because I remembered that the dogs were barking because they detected the Satan, because they have a A chush.
Nah, it's not what the Midrash
Malach
says.
Hamavis, Malach Hamavis.
You have to show us where that is. There could be another met, and by the way, there's another story of another person who was taken this way, who the Sutton confused him. He was always learning. It was also grabbed. It's not the David HaMelech story is not the only story in Shas like that. So you might be thinking about another Adam Gadol.
Okay.
Okay, but I think a very nice presentation of Mukzeh, right?
Yeah, very
Yeah,
good.
good.
Very nice, clear from the Gemara. Very, very good. Let's hope it continues to be.
The next one is weapons of Mukzeh, which are Mukzeh, that today that would be the halacha.
It'll be interesting when we get to it, because I know you mentioned the bicycle just now, although we do see
Scooters.
Jews these days riding bicycles on Shabbos. I know it's a whole big question.
I haven't
And of
seen
course-
bicycles. I've seen scooters, not bicycles.
Yes, but I've not seen bicycles too. So it could be that because of the scooters, that was the reason they didn't want scooters, because of with bicycles, because of the mechanical.
No, bicycles were different because bicycle had a chain, and a bicycle on a chain, the chain could basically come off, and then you could basically have to fix the bicycle, and that's what it was. So, but I see today people, some people ride bicycles too.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. Not in our
All right,
neighborhood.
we'll get to it. I'm sure.
Trust me, people are riding bicycles on
Okay.
Shabbos.
Maybe Yontif. Yontif with carrying is a different thing. I've seen Yontif. Sometimes people were more lenient, but we'll get to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Speak every